discouraged. He's living with 600 men in political exile in Gath. He's restless and maybe hungry, so he turns to carrying out raids on various groups. Let's see where that gets him. Hi, I'm Ken Godevanis, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. Today we look at 1 Samuel, the 27th chapter, verses 8 to 12. 1 Samuel 27, 8 to 12. Thanks for studying with us. Our text says he and his men raided the Geshurites, the Gersites, and the Amalekites. Now these were nomads, or Bedouin tribes, if you like, that were not aligned with Achish. So David felt safe in attacking them. The commentator Ellicott tells us that the first two were the remains of a once powerful race disinherited or expelled by the Amorites. The third one named, the Amalekites, were the remnant of that once powerful tribe destroyed by Saul in his famous war when his disobedience incurred the wrath of Samuel. We studied it together earlier. David attacked them and left no man or woman alive. He took their animals and even clothing and then returned to Achish, who asked him where he had made a raid that day, which to me implies that Achish was aware of his activities. And David told him he had raided the Negev, or the southern dry lands of the tribes of Judah, other groups called the Jerahmeelites, and the Kenites. Now here's the thing. These tribes were Israelites, and in fact David is said to have been friendly with one or more of them. So he was lying to Achish. He left no one alive so they wouldn't be spreading things about what David had really done and who he had really gone after. Achish believed him, thinking David had made himself hated by, or as the Hebrew text states, he really stinks or is odious to his own people of Israel. And so he wanted to make him his servant permanently. There the chapter ends, and we need to go digging for scriptural gems. There's no excuse whatsoever for what David did in this passage, the nefarious killing and then lying about it. The Bible does not even mention the children, which I find rather odd. It had no problem mentioning it before. We can only imagine the calamities. Based on the rest of the story that we know about David, we can only say that this is proof positive that God can use imperfect, flawed men and women. If you thought he wouldn't, maybe this will convince you. Here's the lesson. If you have had a sinful life, really bad, you still don't have to disqualify yourself from serving God. If God used David, he wants to use you and me. Our qualifications are the same as David's. We're all imperfect and sinners. Matthew Henry looks at it this way, quote, "He avenged an old quarrel that God had with these nations, and at the same time fetched in provisions for himself and his army, for by their swords they must live. The Amalekites were to be all cut off. Probably the Geshurites and the Gezrites were branches of Amalek. Saul had been rejected for sparing them, and David makes up the deficiency of his obedience before he succeeds him. He smote them and left none alive. The service paid itself, for they carried off abundance of spoil, which served for the subsistence of David's forces." End of quote. I will let you decide. Should he have gone after old enemies of God? I personally think he could have found other ways to get provisions, maybe by working again or putting his men to work for others. We also know that what David did here was totally without the approval of God. He never sought it, and he never got it. Instead of fighting wars for God's honor as he did when he fought Goliath, David was now fighting wars for his own profit. I can't help but think of the former wars that Western countries fought in. They were mostly for honor, for freedom, and even for God. But these days, leaders have discovered that wars also mean money. If not from those we defeat, certainly money to those that make the arms that we buy. Or certainly money from those allies that we sell our arms to. No wonder God is not letting us win them easily or at all in some cases. We haven't sought his guidance on them, and our motives are all wrong. We also note that while we might think that David lied to Achish about who he was raiding because he was ashamed of his actions, the fact remains he lied to him to gain favor in his eyes, which he wanted from the beginning. By thinking that David was fighting Israel, that would make David look good to Achish. And by killing everyone whom he raided, there was no way anyone could expose his lies to Achish, who thought he was killing Israelites. This is just a foreshadow of a much later time when we'll find David being involved in a much more famous act of sin and still killing someone to cover up for it. You may know what that was. But clearly it is here in this passage that this approach to evil got its roots in David's heart. And Achish, believing he had David in a trap, being hated by his own people of Israel, rejoiced. David Gusick puts it well, quote, Achish believed that David burned all his bridges with the people of God. It all looks pretty dark for him, but David had not and could not burn his bridge with God, end of quote. And how important it is, no matter what we have done, to realize that God has still not rejected us and waits with open arms to welcome us into his family and into his service. That's the lesson for today. Next time, we see David's further bonding with Achish, and in preparation for battle against the Philistines, Saul seeks to consult a medium or a witch. Join us for that. We're not done with David's evilness yet, but his good is also to come. Thank you to 2 recent subscribers who joined our YouTube channel. Hope many others do, so you'll be notified right away and automatically of our posts. Please join them so you get notification of our posts. Study, share, write to us. And we also ask you to consider joining our Facebook group page, Digging for Scriptural